The first time I truly saw her, I realized silence wasn't an empty space, but a presence. And we were both standing in the middle of it. Her name was Clara. She was the new owner of the old bookshop, the one with the perpetually dusty windows and the scent of yellowed paper and regret. I was just the guy fixing the leak in the ceiling above the poetry section, my hands gritty with plaster, feeling out of place among the sonnets. She stood by the front desk, a woman in her mid-40s with a sweep of dark hair silvering at the temples, her posture so straight it seemed like a defense against something. She wasn't just looking at the rain-streaked window. She was listening to the quiet of the shop, her head tilted as if deciphering a secret melody. "It's not broken," I said, my voice too loud for the hush. She turned, and her eyes, the color of weathered sea glass, found mine. They didn't dart away. They held. "What isn't?" "The silence," I mumbled, wiping my hands on my jeans. "You said you liked the quiet when you hired me. It's not broken. It's just resting." A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It didn't reach her eyes, not fully, but it was a start. "Is that what you think silence does?" "It rests." I shrugged, feeling 26 and impossibly young. "Maybe. Or maybe it waits." She moved then, gliding between the bookshelves with a grace that made my clumsy work boots feel like anchors. She stopped near my ladder, her gaze tracing the new, clean patch of ceiling. "It waits for what?" "For this, a reckless part of my mind supplied. For you to look at me like you're trying to read the margins of my soul." I came down the ladder, the rungs creaking under my weight. The air between us shifted, charged with the scent of rain and old books. When I reached the floor, we were close. Close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, a map of a life I knew nothing about. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her. "I don't know what it waits for," I admitted, my voice dropping to a near whisper. Her hand, elegant and capable, came up to brush a fleck of dried plaster from my shirt sleeve. The touch was brief, a whisper of contact against the faded cotton, but it sent a jolt straight through me. My breath hitched. Her fingers lingered for a fraction of a second too long before falling away. "You have a little," she trailed off, her eyes dropping to where her fingers had been, then lifting back to my face. The air was so still I could hear the soft catch in her throat. In that suspended moment, the only thing that existed was the space between our bodies, the ghost of her touch on my sleeve, and the profound, terrifying understanding that something had just begun. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was a held breath, a warning, a promise. And then the bell above the shop door jangled, harsh and invasive. Her gaze snapped away from mine, the connection severed. A customer stood there, shaking water from an umbrella, and the real world came crashing back in. Clara took a small, deliberate step back, her professional mask sliding neatly into place. But as she moved to greet the newcomer, she glanced back at me over her shoulder, a single, unreadable look that held the echo of everything that had just passed. The door was open, and I was already on the wrong side of it. I started finding excuses to be at the shop. A follow-up on the plaster, a question about a bookshelf that needed reinforcing. Pathetic, transparent reasons that she saw right through, but never called me on. A week after the plaster incident, I found her perched on a rolling ladder, trying to reshelf a heavy hardcover. Her arm trembled slightly with the effort. "Let me," I said, crossing the space before I could think. Our fingers brushed during the exchange of the book. A simple, practical moment that shouldn't have felt like a lightning strike. But her skin was cool, and mine was suddenly burning. She didn't let go immediately. We just stood there, the weight of the book suspended between us, a bridge of paper and ink and something infinitely more dangerous. "My husband," she said, her voice quiet, he hated this place, "called it a money pit for sentimental fools." She released the book, her hand falling to her side. He was right, of course. It was the first time she'd mentioned him in the past tense. The word husband landed like a stone in my gut, but there was offered a fragile, terrifying hope. "Why buy it then?" I asked, my voice rough. She looked around, her gaze softening. "Because the silence here felt like my own. Not the one he left behind in our big, empty house. That one was loud." I understood. I'd spent my last relationship trying to fill the silences with noise, with pointless chatter, with background TV, with anything to avoid the quiet truth that we had nothing to say to each other. Being with Clara was the opposite. The silence was the whole point. I finished shelving the book. When I stepped down, she was still there, closer than she needed to be. The scent of her perfume, something like jasmine and old paper, wrapped around me. "People will talk," she whispered, not looking at me, but at the shelf behind my shoulder. "A boy your age, always hanging around a woman like me." "I'm not a boy." The words came out sharper than I intended. Finally, her eyes met mine. There was a vulnerability there I hadn't seen before, a crack in her elegant composure. "I know," she said, her voice barely audible. "That's the problem." She moved to walk away, but I, acting on an impulse I didn't recognize, gently caught her wrist. Not to stop her, just to feel the delicate bones beneath my fingertips for one more second. Her breath hitched. She didn't pull away. She just stood there, her pulse hammering against my thumb, a frantic, secret rhythm that echoed my own. The air between us was electric, thick with everything we wouldn't say. The following Thursday, the shop was closed for inventory. I'd offered to help, telling myself it was because she needed the muscle for moving heavy boxes. A lie so thin it was transparent. We worked in a comfortable rhythm, the only sound the soft thud of books and the rustle of paper. The space between us had become its own entity, a tangible force that pulled and repelled in equal measure. I'd reach for a stack, and her hand would be there. Our shoulders would brush as we passed in the narrow aisle, a contact that felt less like an accident and more like a confession. I was on the ladder again, and she was below, handing me a pile of vintage classics. Her fingers grazed mine as she passed up a worn copy of Wuthering Heights. I fumbled, and the book tumbled, pages fluttering, to land spine up on the floor between us. We both moved at once, bending down in the cramped space. Our heads nearly collided. We froze, crouched together on the worn Persian rug, our faces inches apart. Her eyes were wide, her lips slightly parted. The air vanished from my lungs. I could see the faint dusting of freckles across the bridge of her nose, the quick, shallow rise and fall of her chest. This was it, the moment the tension would snap. My gaze dropped to her mouth. I leaned in, just a fraction. The sharp, electronic buzz of her phone on the countertop shattered the silence. She flinched back as if burned, scrambling to her feet. "It's my sister," she said, her voice unsteady as she looked at the screen. She's checking in." She didn't pick it up. She just stood there, wrapping her arms around herself. "She asks about you. Says it's sweet that I've found help." The word sweet hung in the air, pathetic and diminishing. I stood up slowly, the spell broken, replaced by a cold wash of reality. "Clara," I started, but she shook her head, her back to me. "This is a bad idea," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "You're an I'm. God, what am I doing?" I should have agreed. I should have walked away. Instead, I closed the small distance between us. I didn't touch her. I just stood behind her, so close that the heat from my body must have seeped into her skin. I could see the fine hairs on the nape of her neck, the way she trembled. "Tell me to leave," I murmured, my voice low by her ear. "Say the words, and I'll walk out that door and never come back." She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stood there, trapped in the circle of my nearness, her silence the most honest, damning, and exhilarating answer she could have given. The silence after my challenge was a living thing, thick and heavy in the dusty air. She didn't tell me to leave. She didn't turn around. She just stood there, her shoulders tense, listening to the ragged sound of my own breathing. Then, slowly, she turned to face me. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a raw, fierce intensity that stole the air from my lungs. Her eyes were dark pools of conflict, of want and war. "Do you have any idea what you're asking?" Her voice was a strained whisper. "You look at me and you see what? A story. A mystery to solve? I'm a 46-year-old woman who owns a failing bookshop. My life is a collection of quiet disappointments. You're 26. Your life is supposed to be loud. It was..." I cut in, stepping closer, eliminating the last inch between us. Our bodies weren't touching, but I could feel the warmth of her through my clothes. It was so damn loud I couldn't hear myself think. Until I walked in here. Until you. A small, broken sound escaped her lips. She looked up at me, and the last of her defenses crumbled. I saw it happen. I saw the surrender. My hand came up, not with intention, but with a will of its own. My fingers, still rough from work, brushed a stray strand of dark hair from her cheek. Her eyes fluttered closed at the contact, and she leaned into my touch, her skin impossibly soft against my work-roughened fingers. It was the slightest of movements, but it was a cataclysm. Her hand came up to rest on my chest, over my heart, which was hammering against my ribs like it wanted to break free and offer itself to her. People will think, she started, her eyes still closed. I don't care what people think, I murmured, my face so close to hers I could feel her breath, warm and sweet, on my lips. I only care what you feel. Her eyes opened then, and they held mine, filled with a terrifying, beautiful truth. Her fingers curled into the fabric of my shirt, pulling me the last fraction of an inch. The world narrowed to this. The scent of jasmine and old paper, the frantic beat of my heart under her palm, the heat of her body so close to mine, and the space between our lips, a distance that was now nothing more than a promise about to be kept. My head tilted. Hers angled to meet me. Our lips were a breath apart. The kiss never came. The word was a whisper, a ghost of sound breathed against my lips. David. It was her husband's name. Not was. Is. The air in the room didn't just still. It died. I felt it happen, a physical coldness washing over the space where our heat had been. My hand, which had been cupping her cheek, fell to my side as if the tendons had been severed. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with a horror that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her own confession. Her hand flew to her mouth, as if she could physically shove the name back in. He's not gone, I asked, the question tasting like ash. She shook her head, a frantic, jerky movement. He's in Seattle. A trial separation. It was supposed to be temporary. A year to figure things out. Her voice was a shattered thing. He called this morning. He wants to talk. He's flying back next week. The word temporary echoed in the silence, mocking us. The one that got away wasn't a memory for her. He was a living, breathing man with a return ticket. My longing, which had felt so pure and destined, curdled in an instant into something shameful. I was the complication, the temporary distraction. I took a full step back, the distance between us now a chasm. The warmth of her body was a memory, replaced by the chill of reality. I could see the guilt etching itself into the lines around her eyes, the shame in the slump of her shoulders. I'm sorry, she whispered, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. I should have told you. I liked the way you looked at me. Like I was just Clara, not his wife. Not a problem to be solved. The truth was a blade. It wasn't that she had lied. It was that she had used me to feel unseen in the way she desperately wanted. And I had used her to fill a silence I couldn't stand. I turned away, my jaw so tight it ached. I walked to the door, my movement stiff. My hand was on the knob, the cold brass a shock. Are you going to see him? I asked, my back to her, unable to turn around. Her silence was her answer. It was a yes. It was an I have to. It was the sound of the one that got away, coming back. I didn't wait for the words. I opened the door and walked out into the cooling evening, the bell jangling behind me like a funeral diary. The decision was made. The inevitable was now barreling toward us, and there was nothing left to do but brace for the impact. A week passed. I didn't go back. I threw myself into other jobs, other spaces, trying to drown out the memory of her silence, her scent, the shattered look in her eyes. It was useless. She had become the quiet in my own head. On the 8th day, I found myself standing across the street from the bookshop as a light rain began to fall. I told myself I was just passing by. Another pathetic lie. The closed sign was flipped, but the lights inside were dim. And then I saw him. A tall man in a trench coat, standing on the doorstep, a suitcase at his feet. David. He looked exactly as I'd imagined, polished, permanent. My stomach twisted. I turned to leave, the finality of it a physical pain. Then I saw her. She was standing just inside the door, her hand on the lock. She wasn't opening it. She was looking past him, through the rain-streaked glass, her eyes searching the street until they found me. The world narrowed to that single, silent connection. The rain, the man on her step, it all faded into a blur. Her gaze was a plea and a confession all at once. See me. See what this is costing me. I saw the shame in the tight line of her mouth, the longing in the way her free hand pressed flat against the glass. She was trapped between a life that wanted her back and a feeling that made her feel truly seen for the first time. David said something to her, his posture impatient. She didn't look away from me, and I understood. This was her choice, not mine. I could stand there forever, a ghost in the rain, or I could let her go. I gave her a single, slow nod. It wasn't a signal. It was a release. It's okay. Her eyes glistened. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her shoulders squaring. Then, she turned her head and looked at the man on her doorstep. And she shook her head. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but it was the most profound thing I had ever witnessed. He stiffened, argued, but she stood her ground, her body a shield against a life she no longer wanted. He finally left, his shoulders slumped in defeat, disappearing into the rainy evening. The street was empty again. She was still standing there, behind the glass, her hands still on the lock. This time, her eyes were only on me, filled with a terrifying, beautiful clarity. I crossed the street, the rain soaking through my jacket, my heart a wild, hopeful drum in my chest. I stopped on the other side of the glass. We didn't move. We just watched each other, breathing in sync, two flawed people who had chosen the messy, complicated, impossible thing. There was no more silence between us, only understanding. The lock clicked, a soft, final sound in the quiet street. She opened the door, not wide, just enough. No grand gesture, just an invitation. The scent of old books and jasmine drifted out, a fragrance I now knew was the smell of coming home. I stepped inside, the warmth of the shop a stark contrast to the cool rain on my skin. Water dripped from my hair, pattering softly on the worn floorboards. We stood a foot apart, the space charged not with unresolved tension, but with a profound, quiet reckoning. "He's gone," she said, her voice hushed. "I know. I'm 46, she whispered, the number of fragile confession in the dim light. "I have lines on my face and a history that's a mess. You're you." I reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. My fingers laced with hers. Her hand was cold, but it steadied in my grasp. "I'm a 26-year-old man who's been living in a world that was too loud," I said, "until I found your quiet." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. I lifted my other hand and caught it with my thumb, my touch lingering on her skin. This was it. No more hiding, no more fear of what people would think. Just this. I leaned in and pressed a kiss to her forehead. It was tender, a seal of acceptance for all her years, her history, her fears. She let out a soft, broken sigh, her body swaying into mine. She led me to the old velvet sofa at the back of the shop. We didn't speak. We sat, her head coming to rest on my shoulder, my arm wrapping around her. Her body fit against mine, as if the space between us had always been an error waiting to be corrected. I could feel the steady, slow beat of her heart through my damp jacket. Outside, the rain continued to fall, wrapping the shop in a cocoon of soft sound. There were no more promises to break, no more lies between us. Just the weight of her against me, the feel of her hair against my cheek, and the deep, abiding peace of a silence we now shared. We sat there for a long time, in the warm, dim light, two imperfect pieces that had finally found their fit. The story wasn't about a beginning or an end. It was about finding the person whose quiet harmonizes with your own. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next? Let us know in the comments below.